Trump has a thin skin, and he doesn't like it when people call him to task.
Mm,
And it didn't work for Zelensky in the White House at the Oval Office.
mm.
It's not working for him now. And I've recommended this to my Ukrainian friends and my and senior Ukrainian officials. Zelensky could learn something from Putin.
Mm.
When Trump gave Putin hell in the last few days, and all Putin said is, "Oh, he's a little bit emotional," right?
Yeah.
Putin knows why annoy Trump. Uh, and Zelensky, excuse me, Trump only pays attention in Russia to Putin and in Ukraine to Zelensky. So there are other Ukrainian officials, even senior ones, who can express some concern about American policy.
So, John Herbst, ambassador, former ambassador to Ukraine, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program. We
My
have
pleasure.
seen, good to have you here. We've seen another heavy barrage against Ukraine overnight. And the big question, will President Trump back up his verbal denunciation of Vladimir Putin with new tough sanctions? I spoke yesterday, Ambassador, to a former U.S. Army general, Ben Hodges, and to a former ambassador, Kurt Volker. They thought the likelihood of that was zero. What do you think?
Count me agnostic. Certainly, the pressure on Trump to do something is growing. He does look like an indecisive, not strong president. That's a look he does not like. He's taking increasing criticism for it. Uh, so we just don't know. The pattern, obviously, since February, has been of Trump devoting more fire and more pain to Zelensky in Ukraine than to Putin and Russia, the aggressor.
Mm,
Even though it's been apparent, even for people who didn't understand what Putin was doing since the middle of March, that at every occasion that Trump has put forward a proposal to reduce the violence, to create a ceasefire, Ukraine has said yes and Russia has said no. So it's very hard for Trump to continue saying he's unhappy with both sides when in fact there's only one side that's preventing an end to the fighting, which Trump seeks. But Trump has proved able to ignore this, although what he said on Sunday and then repeated on Truth Social suggests that it's harder for him to do that.
and when you say, Ambassador, the pressure is mounting on President Trump, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the pressure of public opinion? Do you mean the pressure from
There,
Congress?
there is serious public opinion pushing for stronger policy. You had a poll from a few weeks ago showing that 69% of Americans believe that we should be sending as much as, if not more, aid than we were sending before Trump cut off the spigot. We just had a poll come out in the last week, which also showed over 60% of Americans think we should be sending aid to Ukraine, not just sending weapons that were bought, but sending aid to
Mm,
Ukraine. So, in terms of the American public, it's very clear that a large majority want that to happen.
mm,
In terms of Republicans in Congress, we see this Lindsey Graham, Richard Blumenthal bill on major sanctions has 80 co-sponsors.
yes.
That's a whole lot of Republicans. And I've heard in privately that the Trump White House was happy to see that bill put out on the floor in early April as a
Mm,
way to put pressure on the Kremlin, but did not want it to actually move. I'm now hearing that the White House is not necessarily interested in blocking it. In other words, they may leave it up to individual senators to vote their own preference. If that's true, then that bill will become law. But again, to me, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm hearing
mm.
these things. This reflects thinking within the administration. It doesn't reflect what they're actually going to decide.
Indeed. I mean, interesting if true, but I was just looking at a letter written by Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina senator, who is one of those names putting forward this proposal for sanctions, which would impose 500% tariffs on countries
Right.
buying from Russia, including China. And then I read Lindsey Graham in that letter saying he's not pushing it. He's hoping for the best at this stage. So he's still waiting and watching. You have to wonder, what is he waiting for? Is there any hope left of Putin choosing a path to peace? He shows no sign of wanting to take that course, Ambassador.
I think that reflects Graham's caution, not in analyzing Russian intent or Putin's intent, but in approaching the White House. Trump is very powerful within the GOP, and even though there are significant concerns about this wavering weakness on Russia, there's not much willingness to actually challenge him publicly. Which,
Mm,
by the way, was also true amongst Democrats, especially in the Senate and Biden, when Biden was refusing to give Ukraine the weapons it needed.
mm,
Privately, they spoke to him, but publicly, they, by and large, kept their silence. But this tendency to support your party's president is stronger right now among Trump, because Trump is stronger vis-a-vis the party than Biden was vis-a-vis the Democrats.
yes.
So, are they willing to actually push him? Um, Perhaps. Congressman Bacon issued a very strong statement in the last couple of days. So did Senator Grassley, although they've proved to be more independent than many of their Republican colleagues.
Yes, yes, really, really interesting thoughts. And as someone who knows Ukraine and the workings of the machine in Ukraine, from what you're saying, I wonder then, do you consider that the leadership of Ukraine, that Ukraine's politicians, parliamentarians would be best employed now lobbying American Congress members on Capitol Hill rather than Donald Trump? Maybe that's the sort of operation that might yield fruit.
Well, they are doing a fair amount of that now. And they get, by and large, a respectful hearing and a friendly hearing in Congress. But that friendly hearing thus far is not extended to significant urgings of the White House, especially in public, to do the right thing in terms of defending American interests and making it hard for Putin to take the rest of Ukraine.
And President Zelensky's frustration becomes more obvious all the time. I mean, the other day, he spoke about
Yes.
the silence of America, which very plainly irritated President Trump. Is calling out Donald Trump a sensible course? Is there maybe no other way?
I think that Zelensky continues to make the same mistake. There's no question that Zelensky was substantively right talking about the sad phenomenon of American silence in the wake of this massive Russian bombardment of cities and civilians. But Trump has a thin skin, and he doesn't like it when people call him to task.
Mm,
And it didn't work for Zelensky in the White House at the Oval Office.
mm,
It's not working for him now. And I've recommended this to my Ukrainian friends and senior Ukrainian officials. Zelensky could learn something from Putin.
mm.
When Trump gave Putin hell in the last few days, and all Putin said is, "Oh, he's a little bit emotional," right?
Yeah.
Putin knows why annoy Trump. Uh, and Zelensky, excuse me, Trump only pays attention in Russia to Putin and in Ukraine to Zelensky. So there are other Ukrainian officials, even senior ones, who can express some concern about American policy.
Yes.
But Zelensky's a man who made his mark first as a comedian and businessman, and then as president by being outspoken in public.
Yes.
But he should be able to learn in this situation that is not tactically wise. Because look,
Interesting.
in that True Social post that Trump put out the other day, first he slams Putin for obviously being an aggressor and doing evil things, murdering Ukrainian civilians. And then he slams Zelensky for talking too much. You'd
Yes.
think that someone in Kiev would recognize this is not the way to go.
And when you talk about President Trump in these terms as his petulance, the thin skin, it's
Right.
almost as if you're discussing a petulant child.
Well, look, I'm not looking to name call. I'm looking to get the right policy. President Trump is not the first thin-skinned politician whom I've observed. It's many politicians are thin-skinned. My point is, when you're dealing with the most powerful man in the world, whose weapons are very important to the defense of your country, you need to be shrewd.
Mm, deal with the reality. In your view,
Yes.
what is the best achievable outcome to the war in Ukraine?
Well, if we had a truly strategically sound American president, we would arm Ukraine to the hilt so they could kick the Russians out of most of the country, and so it would be very hard for Russia to maintain its presence even in Crimea. But that is not the policy of President Trump. That was not the policy of President Biden. Trump, as a candidate and as president for the second time, has laid out a perfectly sensible approach to at least stopping the war is right now, which is to require both sides to compromise. And Ukraine has demonstrated that willingness to compromise and threatening major pressure if one or both of those parties do not compromise. The problem is Trump has not implemented his own policy because he's very
Yes.
clear that Putin is the obstacle, and it's very clear that President Trump does not want to put major pressure on him.
Yes.
But if Trump is serious about achieving the peace he claims to want, and actually I shouldn't say
Yes.
claims to want, I believe it, he wants it, then he will come to the conclusion the only way to do that is to make Putin pay a hell of a price for continuing this war.
Okay, but if President Trump does not want to apply serious pressure on Putin, what does he want? What is President Trump's ideal outcome? You say he
I
wants
don't
peace. Let's say that that's the case. He wants peace, but crucially, on what terms? What is his desired outcome?
look. He understands, or we know that there were articles about this right after the election and even more recently, that the Trump team understands that if they were to create a fake peace, which enables them to say, yes, we got an agreement, and then Putin comes back for the rest of Ukraine,
Mm.
Trump would look like one of the world's biggest foreign policy losers. So he and his team recognize there's some danger there, but he is yet willing to pull the trigger and say, yes, I'm going to really push the Kremlin to do the right thing by putting massive pressure on him. He did one good thing in recent weeks, which was alongside the mineral deal, he okayed the transfer of American weapons to Ukraine. That was noted in the Kremlin. That was smart policy. He did it very quietly, which is not necessarily a problem. But when he does that quietly and he agonizes publicly about putting some pressure on Russia in the form of sanctions, it suggests to the Kremlin that that Trump is just the latest in a long line of weak Western leaders who are not willing to challenge Russian aggression. And President Trump, if he wants that peace deal, the peace he set out to end this dreadful war, he's going to have to put major pressure on Putin.
Yes. Okay. Last question. Other leaders, European leaders, including our own leader in the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, they have clearly run out of patience. They want to apply all the pressure they're able to apply, but even put together, they cannot match the kind of economic firepower and pressure that President Trump can. In doing whatever it is that they can, is there a possibility that they might, for want of a better word, embarrass or shame President Trump into taking the action that they want to see and that you want to
I
see?
have no, I have no doubt that the strong policy we've seen in Europe since the Munich Security Conference, we didn't really see it before then, but we've seen it since, both in terms of trying to put sanctions on Russia and organize to send European troops to Ukraine, is something that, one, President Trump is welcome to his credit, and two, it does keep him in the game. So, and of course, if the Europeans were to move on sanctions without the US, that would cause some additional pain to Russia.
Mm.
And I think that does increase the odds of the US eventually doing the right thing. And by the way, my understanding is that I don't have all the details in front of me at the moment, that in the context of the upcoming G7, the feckless approach of the administration of being unwilling, both at the UN and in the G7, to call out the Russians for the aggressors they are, is changing. And that could be, one sign of a pivot in the Trump White House.
That is interesting. To see a change in that pitch and that rhetoric would be noteworthy. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.